In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Welcome to Watch Mojo. And today, we're counting down our picks for the top 20 most ridiculous, absurd, and factually incorrect things said by U.S. politicians.
So we're going to play a game called Bushism or Not.
Number 20. I took the initiative in creating the internet. Al Gore. In a 1999 interview with CNN journalist Wolf Blitzer, almost U.S. President Al Gore stated that he took initiative in creating the internet.
I've traveled to every part of this country during the last 6 years. During my service in the United States Congress, I took the initiative in creating the internet.
This led to a firestorm of ridicule and controversy against Gore, who was widely misquoted as claiming to have invented the internet himself. It had never been Gore's intention to make that specific claim. He was simply trying to highlight various initiatives and policies he had been involved with that helped foster the right environment for the internet to grow. Gore's poor word choice left him ripe for the attack, however. Let this be a lesson to all you current or future politicians watching today. Phrasing matters.
They shared with me their expectations that it could very well grow into a much bigger thing than it was back in those days.
Number 19. My fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize. Hank Johnson. On March 25, 2010, as is tradition, the House Armed Services Committee met to discuss the 2011 defense budget. The otherwise routine hearing had a moment of unusual ridiculousness while discussing the Guam military base. After giving a way too detailed report on the island's size, Georgia Representative Hank Johnson cited his worry that adding more military personnel would cause the island to, quote, tip over and capsize.
The whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and capsize.
The admiral on the other side of the bench was quick to dispel that concern. After all, we live in a real world and not a Nickelodeon cartoon. Johnson's office later put out a statement that he was simply being humorous and metaphorical, but that was one joke that just didn't land.
We don't anticipate that.
Number 18. The internet is not something that you just dump something on. It's not a big truck, it's a series of tubes. Ted Stevens.
And again, the internet is not something that you just dump something on. It's not a big truck. It's a series of tubes.
Ted Stevens had a 40-year-long U.S. Senate career, defined by such highlights as a 2008 corruption scandal and a 2006 net neutrality speech. In that speech, he had been arguing against an amendment to ban providers from charging higher rates for faster internet. Stevens got a bit too colorful describing how the internet works. He clarified that the internet was in fact not a truck where you can dump things en masse, but rather a series of tubes that can apparently get clogged up like a rush hour freeway. The comment was widely mocked and derided, notably by Jon Stewart. If only there was some worldwide tool Stevens could have used to look up a better description of the internet.
I look only forward, and I still see the day when I can remove the cloud that currently surrounds me.
Number 17. Stand up, Chuck. Let 'em see you. Joe Biden. In the year 2000, Eminem asked the real Slim Shady to please stand up. 8 years later, at a campaign event, Joe Biden asked Missouri State Senator Chuck Graham to do the same.
Chuck Graham, state senator's here. Chuck, stand up, Chuck. Let him see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about?
The only problem was that Graham required a wheelchair due to his paralysis, so standing up wasn't really an option. Biden realized his mistake and awkwardly tried to pivot away from his gaffe, asking everyone else to stand up instead. Thankfully, enough people obliged that Biden was able to apologize, and the incident passed with some self-deprecation and little additional fanfare.
I tell you what, you're making everybody else stand up, though, pal. Thank you very, very much.
Number 16. There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration. Gerald Ford. You have three choices when asked a question during a presidential debate. You can give a right answer, a wrong answer, or just plain confuse everyone. Gerald Ford chose the latter when asked about Soviet domination in Eastern Europe in the second 1976 presidential debate.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration.
His incredible response that there was none forced the moderator to ask him again. Ford doubled down, insisting there would be no Soviet domination during his presidency, using specific countries as examples. It's interesting to note that Ford likely wasn't so much wrong as simply belting out U.S. foreign policy, which refused to acknowledge the Soviet Empire and insisted every nation was independent. Unfortunately for him, though, most people didn't catch that subtle distinction, and he ultimately lost the election.
Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians are not using Eastern Europe as their own sphere of influence and occupying most of the countries there? And
Number 15. It depends on what the meaning of the word is. Bill Clinton. The Clinton-Lewinsky scandal first broke in 1998 and quickly dominated media headlines. A few days after the initial reports, Clinton gave the now infamous press conference where he categorically denied having any relationship with Monica Lewinsky.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
During his grand testimony hearing, he was asked about statements made by his attorney denying his relationship with Lewinsky. Clinton stated that the veracity of those statements really depends on what the word is means.
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. Yes.
This Simone Biles-worthy feat of verbal gymnastics wasn't even Clinton's only attempt to use semantics in his favor as he tried to dodge the consequences. While Clinton's presidency is largely viewed in a positive light, the scandal remains a significant part of his legacy. Number 14. As Putin rears his head and comes into the airspace of the United States of America, Sarah Palin.
You've cited Alaska's proximity to Russia as part of your foreign policy experience. What did you mean by that?
Sarah Palin dramatically rose to the national stage when she was selected to be John McCain's running mate in the 2008 U.S. presidential elections. While her selection was initially certified fresh, Palin soon began to get called out for her apparent inexperience. To combat this, she tried to bolster her foreign policy credentials by citing Russia's proximity to Alaska. Palin further emphasized this point in an interview with Katie Couric by describing how Alaska is Putin's target as he rears his head and enters U.S. airspace. It was a statement that did absolutely nothing but give people an absurd image of Putin as a dragon getting out of bed in the morning.
When you consider even national security issues with Russia, as Putin rears his head and comes into the airspace of the United States of America.
Number 13. Binders full of women. Mitt Romney.
I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
There are plenty of good ways to highlight the gender pay gap. And then there's what Mitt Romney said in the second 2012 presidential debate. When asked a question on pay equity for women, the Massachusetts governor described receiving, quote, whole binders full of women while trying to fill his cabinet. Romney had managed to somehow take a topic as dull as resume files and sound like a sleazy talent scout looking for America's next top model. The quote went viral, garnering significant attention from the media, becoming a meme, and putting Romney on blast for his supposed misogyny. It certainly didn't help matters when Obama added the quote to his campaign arsenal.
Little did he know, that very second, memes started popping up of binder full of women on the internet.
Number 12. Life is indeed precious, and I believe the death penalty helps to affirm that fact. Ed Koch.
You're, of course, against the death penalty. No, I'm for the death penalty. She screamed. Honest to God, she screamed.
They say if you love something, let it go. A philosophy former New York City Mayor Ed Koch clearly embraced when he pontificated that the death penalty helps affirm the preciousness of life. This oxymoron was included in a 1985 essay by Koch published in the New Republic in support of his pro-death penalty stance. This stance often put him in conflict with fellow Democrats and civil rights organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union. Koch's main argument in favor of this assertion was that the death penalty would deter those planning to kill or commit other violent crimes. The argument falls flat when you consider that most criminals aren't really planning on getting caught, or may be equally deterred by alternate penalties.
So that distinguished me from a lot of liberals and reformers because that issue was considered to be a right-wing issue.
Number 11. If Lincoln were alive today, he'd roll over in his grave. Gerald Ford.
That the attention of the President, the Congress, and the American people would have been diverted from the problems that we have to solve. And that was the principal reason for my granting of the pardon.
Gerald Ford's presidency got off to a rough start in September 1974 when he granted Richard Nixon a full pardon following the Watergate scandal. He then stumbled into a reputation for clumsiness and was an early and regular target of Saturday Night Live. Among his many slips, trips, and gaffes was the declaration that if Abraham Lincoln were alive today, he'd be turning over in his grave at the status of current affairs.
Let's take a look at the recent popularity polls, shall we?
This butchering of a classic punchline serves as a prime example of someone speaking faster than their brain works. Or perhaps Ford had thought Lincoln enjoyed rolling around in empty coffins during his leisure time between Gettysburg Address preparation sessions and trips to the Top Hat store. Number 10. Every month that we do not have an economic recovery package, 500 million Americans lose their jobs. Nancy Pelosi. It's not unusual for politicians to slightly bend the truth or employ hyperbole to pass legislation or enact policy. Nancy Pelosi, however, took it to another level when she claimed in early 2009 that 500 million Americans would lose their jobs every month if Obama's stimulus package is not passed. Given that the total U.S. population at the time, including children, was just over 300 million, we're fairly certain Pelosi momentarily forgot how math works. Even taking her statement global, the entire world would find itself out of a job in about a year. But given that this was Nancy Pelosi, maybe the bill just had to pass for us to understand her unique logic.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Number 9. The Holocaust was an obscene period in our nation's history. Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle's vice presidency is largely defined not by any policy or initiative he spearheaded, but by the cornucopia of bizarre statements he made while in office. One of his most confounding statements, however, came when he referenced the Holocaust in 1988, calling it the most obscene period in American history.
It was an obscene period in our nation's history. No, not our nation's, but in World War II.
Quayle attempted to correct this snafu, but only dug himself deeper as he discussed World War II and this century, where he may or may not have lived. Quayle concludes this epic monologue by defining the term Hitlerism, which sounds like a term he created. What do you expect from the man who once fixed a student's already correct spelling of the word potato?
Add one little bit on the end. Just think of potato. How's it? You're right phonetically. What else? There you go.
Number 8. Trees cause more pollution than automobiles. Ronald Reagan.
But I'm proud of having been one of the first to recognize that states and the federal government have a duty to protect our natural resources from the damaging effects of pollution that can accompany industrial development.
If there's one thing Ronald Reagan was a fan of during his presidency, it was deregulation. The former governor of California gutted federal regulation for numerous sectors, including the environment. To promote anti-environmental policy, Reagan even claimed in 1981 that trees are responsible for more pollution than automobiles. This comment was widely mocked by critics, who joked about the presence of killer trees, which surprisingly did not become the title of a Stephen King novel. To be clear, research has shown that some trees do release organic hydrocarbons that contribute to air pollution. However, saying they pollute more than cars is misleading and ignores all the good trees do for the environment.
As I said, our progress on protecting the environment is one of the best-kept secrets in Washington, but it's not by far the only secret, and I'll have more on that.
Number 7. I've been in 57 states. I think one left to go. Barack Obama. Many politicians are known for being highly skilled and charismatic orators, including Barack Obama, who often gave memorable and captivating speeches. Unfortunately, he doesn't always get it right. During a 2008 Oregon campaign rally, when he was first running for president, Obama described how he had been all over the country, having apparently visited 57 states.
I've now been in 57 states. I think one left to go.
Yeah, you heard that right, 57 states. But wait, it gets worse, because it seems he still had one to go and had not visited either Hawaii or Alaska. It was later suggested that he meant to say 47, but we're just going to pretend that he included the great states of Narnia, Westeros, and Middle-earth in his count.
And over the last 15 months, we've traveled to every corner of the United States.
Number 6. The female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down. William Todd Akin. Abortion has always been a divisive issue, with people often not afraid to express and fiercely defend their views. One such view came from former Missouri Representative William Todd Akin, a known abortion critic. In a 2012 JACO Report interview, he gave the startling view that the female body is capable of automatically terminating pregnancies after legitimate sexual assaults.
The female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
The backlash was immediate, with many decrying the statement as both highly insulting and very scientifically inaccurate. Akin was also heavily criticized for his use of the word legitimate to describe sexual assault, as if to question the veracity of some survivors. While he initially apologized for his remarks, he later walked the apology back after losing the 2012 Senate elections.
And what I see is an irresponsible claim that you're trying to take what one man said that is completely indefensible.
Number 5. I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully. George W. Bush.
Did you say, I know that human being and fish can coexist peacefully?
An important part of the U.S. president's job is to better inspire their citizens, to help them believe they can achieve their full potential and do great things. During a September 2000 campaign event, George W. Bush tried to show America he could rise to that task while still practicing good governance. While discussing his energy policies, Bush passionately proclaimed his belief that humans and marine animals can live side by side in peace and harmony. That may not be entirely realistic, given the almost 9 billion pounds of shrimp people consume annually, but it's always good to dream. With all due respect to Bush, though, if peaceful human-fish coexistence is how we get the deep, then he can keep it.
That is?
I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully.
Absolutely correct.
Number 4. We've got to stand with our North Korean allies. Sarah Palin. The early 2010s were filled with rumors about a Sarah Palin 2012 presidential run. During an interview with Glenn Beck around the same time, Palin was asked how she would handle rising tensions with North Korea. She concluded a long-winded answer involving sanctions with the statement that we must stand with our North Korean allies.
But obviously, got to stand with our North Korean allies. We're bound to by treaty.
South
We're
Korean.
also bound by, and
a statement that is 100% without a doubt factually accurate if you take out the word North and put in the word South instead. Beck quickly corrected her and the interview proceeded. While this was likely a simple slip of the tongue from Palin, it unleashed a bounty of criticism on her foreign policy inexperience and her 2008 troubles with their myriad SNL sketches.
You know, we're going to take every aspect of the crisis and look at it, and then we're going to ask ourselves, what would a maverick do in this situation? And then, you know, we'll do that.
Number 3. When the president does it, that means it is not illegal. Richard Nixon. The Watergate scandal rocked the U.S. in the early 1970s, before ending with Nixon's resignation and pardon. Nixon had spent most of those tumultuous years maintaining his innocence and hindering investigations. In 1973, he vehemently announced to a room full of journalists that he was not a crook, 6 months before he was required to pay over $400,000 in back taxes.
Whether or not their president is a crook, well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
During his 1977 interview with David Frost, Nixon was asked if the U.S. president had the authority to commit illegal acts in the nation's best interest. His reply that anything the president does is automatically not illegal perfectly encapsulated his arrogance while ignoring a key tenet of democracy.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. By definition. Exactly.
If only that 2024 Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity had come 5 decades earlier. Number 2. Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women. George W. Bush. It's no secret that the U.S. healthcare system has a lot of issues, including high medical bills, trouble getting insurance, and a shortage of qualified doctors. George W. Bush addressed the latter issue during a Missouri rally in a way only he could. He lamented doctors leaving the profession and OBGYNs no longer able to, quote, practice their love with women.
Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
We're not entirely sure where Bush got this idea from, but we think it might have something to do with some rumors he heard on the internets. We have to give Bush credit, though. He's taken this quote and all his other famous Bushisms with humor and good spirit.
Too many OBGYNs aren't able to practice their love with women all across this country.
That's me.
Before we unveil our top pick, here are a few dishonorable mentions. I think that gay marriage is something that should be between a man and a woman. Arnold Schwarzenegger. I have opinions of my own, strong opinions, but I don't always agree with them. George H.W. Bush. We did not have a terrorist attack on our country during President Bush's term. Dana Perino.
No, we did not have a terrorist attack on our country during President Bush's term. I hope they're not looking at this politically. I do think that we owe it to the American people to call it what it is.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1. Nearly everything out of his mouth. Donald Trump.
Silence of the Lambs. Has anyone ever seen the Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man.
In June 2015, Donald Trump made history when he rode down an escalator and announced that he was running for president. It wasn't his first public foray, but it launched an era of Trump that gave a whole new meaning to the words bizarre and insane. Whether it's letting UV light in the body, liking Taylor Swift's music 25% less, or just not wanting pronouns anymore, Trump's statements have defied all semblance of common sense and logic. He admires Hannibal Lecter and talks about getting the bad hombres out. His racist and misogynistic attacks have been aimed at numerous undeserving targets. Trump's aim is always to make America great again, but he will likely be remembered for the three-ring circus he left.
That name gets further and further away from China as opposed to calling it the Chinese virus.
Which of these sayings had you shaking your head the most? What other unbelievable or idiotic quotes should have been on the list? Let us know in the comments below.
Thank you, Rolling. That's awesome.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.